Hello, YouTube. Sir Dragon X here. Welcome to episode number 8 of our Living in Mexico No Bull series. Today, I have a very interesting couple that retired early and moved to Querétaro, Mexico in the video. Coming up next. Welcome back to Retired Life in Mexico No Bull. This is our Living in Mexico No Bull series. In this episode, we have a couple that moved to Querétaro, Mexico. I'd like to welcome you to the show. How are you doing?
Doing all right. Thanks for having us.
And not only did they move to Querétaro, they also started a YouTube channel, which we'll discuss later on in the interview. Why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourself? Give us a little bit of background about you guys. And my understanding is you moved from China to Mexico, actually. So go ahead.
Yeah, almost, not quite. We went from China to Houston.
Oh, okay.
From Houston to Querétaro.
Perfect. And you're actually from Texas, right?
Correct.
Okay. Go ahead and introduce you guys yourself and give us a little bit about yourselves and kind of where you've been and that type of thing, because we were just discussing right now that you came from China to Houston to Mexico. So kind of introduce yourselves to us.
Sure. My name is Roddy. Like you mentioned, I'm from Texas. Actually, we found out when we were messaging each other that we're from the same area down by the border in a small town called McAllen. There, I'm pretty much born and raised. I was a teacher for about 15 years there in the valley. After a while, I got kind of bored living there, and I decided to get up and go. And then that's when I decided to go to China, to Shanghai. I did kind of the basic thing. I was an English teacher. My idea was to go there for a year and then maybe keep on moving to different places. I liked it so much, I ended up staying there 5 years. And then along the way, that's where I met Landy. About maybe my third year in, is when we met. And we were there for a couple years. And then we just decided it was time to come home. And from there, we went to Houston. And in Houston, we actually got into real estate. I was still a teacher, and I was also a coach as well. And after about 2 years, we had a conversation about changing our lives. And we kind of got into real estate and did some investing. And then COVID hit. And we decided, you know what? I think we're done with teaching. We're done with the U.S. And then that's when we decided to come to Querétaro. And Landy?
My name is Landy. I'm originally from Shanghai, China. I've been living there over 30 years. And I met Roddy, and we got married. So I shifted my life from Shanghai, China to Houston, Texas. And after living there for 5 years, now we're here in Querétaro, Mexico.
And how long have you guys been in Querétaro now?
Just over a year. We moved last February.
And let's go into a little bit, which brings me to my first question is, and I usually am curious, and I know my personal reasons, but why Mexico? What made you guys decide to leave the United States and come to Mexico?
Sure. Can I answer that?
Yeah, I think the number one reason is after been investing in real estate for 5-6 years, and we feel we want to retire earlier. If we still live in Houston, Texas, the living cost is higher, so it will cost us at least another 5 to 10 years to retire. So we chose Mexico. It's closer to Texas than most other countries in the world. We find a direct flight, only 2 hours from Querétaro, direct flight to Houston. And also,
I've actually taken that flight direct to Houston. Actually, to get to McAllen, you have to go through Houston if you go through Querétaro. So there's no direct flights.
Correct.
Yeah, and also the safety, the cost of living, the weather, and that's why we gave a try, and
Yeah.
we liked it here.
Yeah, I mean, we did think about other countries. When we decided to move, we kind of looked around. But like Landy said, Mexico, just its proximity and knowing the culture a little bit and being somewhere different, we did decide on Mexico.
And Roddy, you actually lived on the border, so you kind of have a little bit of a familiarity with Mexico. Well, the
Oh yeah,
border. And I'm almost sure you'll agree with me because I can say it from personal experience that living where you're living is a little bit different than the border. But let me ask you, before we go into the cultural change, let me ask you, why did you choose Querétaro? Did you do research on other areas of Mexico when you decided? And I guess before we go into that, I noticed that you discussed retiring early. I also did retired at 52. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you guys, because I know the way I feel, is that I got to a point in my life where I valued my time more than my money, and I guess that's kind of like where I kind of see you guys kind of saying I value my time because we want to retire early. You were able to do well in real estate. And so, kind of give me a little bit about why Querétaro, and not only why Querétaro, but kind of your mentality as far as retiring early, uh, to see if it's kind of the same concept as I had when I retired early.
sure. So, as we mentioned, when we decided to move to Mexico, we did look at different areas of Mexico. That's going to be natural. Anybody moving definitely should do some research. I think when we first started looking into moving to Mexico, we looked at a lot of beach areas. I think a lot of people have that mentality. You see a lot of shows on TV like, move to the beach, Mexico Live, Cancun and Cabo and Puerto Vallarta. And I think we had that mentality at first, and we started looking at some beach areas around Mexico. Uh, but we did look at some interior places as well. And I think we decided that we both come from very hot areas. I mean, Texas obviously very hot, Shanghai as well, very hot and humid. And we said, yeah, ideally, I think people get the picture in their head and everything's going to be ideal at the beach. But then we thought about it. We're like, maybe we don't want to be in the hot, humid, sandy, windy weather every single day, day in, day out. Let's try something a little different. And so we started looking at interior places. And Landy came one day to me and said, hey, I found this place, Querétaro, online. Before that time, we'd both never heard of it. And we just did some research. And the more we read about it, and like she mentioned, the safety, the weather, the climate, the cleanliness of the city, all those appealed to us. And we just decided that's it. And
Yeah.
really, we just moved here sight unseen. We never visited, nothing. We just decided Querétaro, got our ticket, and a few months later, we were here.
Wow. And actually, that's how I ended up moving to San Miguel. We just visited one day and actually walked. Well, we went on vacation, but then we ended up walking away with a house and just ending up saying, let's go. And so you guys kind of have the same kind of story, retired early as me, retired early and just took the plunge and just moved,
Yeah.
not knowing what to expect or anything else like that. And so you guys retired early. I mean, and I know a lot of people on the show. I have a lot of people talk about on my channel wanting to know about my retiring at 52. A lot of people also, we have a lot of digital nomads that are coming here to Mexico, that type of thing. What motivated you to retire early? I mean, other than the fact that you became financially independent, that type of thing. Even then, I mean, I was able to retire from the government with a pension, so I have a secure income, just like you probably have a secure income from real estate. But there were some changes, I have to admit. We had to cut back on a couple of things compared to living in the United States. Have you found it to be a big adjustment retiring early? And if you have found it, what kind of hurdles have you come in? I mean, I'm almost sure you love it, but what hurdles have you encountered retiring early? And kind of go into, why your decision to retire early and actually move to a different country. Can you kind of go into that?
You want to answer the why?
Yeah, we choose to retire early. I got inspired by Robert Kiyosaki. Probably you already know the author, which is
Mm-hmm.
the author of The Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yeah.
And I've been reading most of their books, includes his wife, Kim Kiyosaki's books.
Mm-hmm.
And their story just inspired us so much. They got retired, I think it's about 40 or 42-year-old. After they've been owning maybe 5,000 or 500 units. So that became my dream. I thought we could have do that too.
Yeah.
And I've been looking at their life, and they even wrote a book called Retire Early and Retire Rich.
Mm-hmm.
So that became our dream and inspired us a lot. So we've been working very hard on it. So after retire early, um, anything changed in our life, or is that something we really want? I think the most thing is we have more freedom, more time, and we can choose what we want to do and what we don't want to do. And we could spend more time with our son, which is Louie. He's only 2 years old, and we could have more freedom to travel, to explore different cultures, and be more relaxing mode, not in the rat race. Plus, we could build other business, so we have our own time. That's why we also start our YouTube channel.
Right. I think if I can add to that, she mentioned, of course, our whole idea was to kind of gain this cash flow and to retire early. But as she mentioned, I think two things that happened that kind of kickstarted us retiring early was one, we had our son Louie. Again, he's only 2. He was born back in 2020 in March. And that was pretty much right when COVID was at its height and all the schools shut down in the US. He was born on the day that the school shut down.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So I always remember that day. And then the next year started, and I said was a teacher for many, many years. I really enjoyed it. Things started changing, and I'm not going to get into all the details. If there's any teachers out there, I think they can probably understand just with things coming down the pipeline and all the changes that they're asking for and lack of accountability. And really, for the first time, I was not feeling good. I mean, there was even points where I literally felt sick going to work. Just I wasn't enjoying it anymore. So I think that, on top of having our new son, with not enjoying work, all this kind of led to the idea of, what, we're done. We have the means to retire early if we decide to go somewhere else. And then that's when we looked into it, and that's when we said, what, it's time to go.
Wow. And let me ask you this. That's kind of it's a very inspiring story because, a lot of people, we get caught up in, like you were a teacher and you keep going and you keep the grind going and you see all these changes. And I see a lot of the changes. I lived in Texas, so I saw a lot of the changes with the teachers. So I kind of know what you kind of were going through, and I have relatives and stuff like that are teachers and can get frustrated. But a lot of times we tend to get into this mode of keep grinding because I got to make my car payment, or keep grinding at this job because I need to make my house payment, or keep grinding at this job because we got another bill to pay, or we want to buy this or do that. And I think that's very inspiring that you guys took it by the hand and said, you know what? Enough is enough, and we're gonna take control of our lives. And one of my really good friends, actually, that runs a podcast called Unconstrained. A lot of his podcast is talking about grabbing a hold of your life and living that. We all talk about, and I told him, I actually was interviewed on his podcast, and I said we talk about freedom all the time in the United States. And a lot of times we relate freedom with, I can tell you anything I want to tell you. I can do whatever I want because I'm free. But, what I discovered moving to Mexico is freedom is really being able to, like you said, do what you want and give something that you have a passion for. and that's very commendable. And even doing a business, something that you got passionate about, instead of just grinding as a teacher and saying, you know what, I'm just going to deal with this until I get my retirement. So, I can totally relate. And I worked for the government for 30 years, so I know what it's like to grind for 30 years. The only difference is that, I had my job was a little bit more distracting, and I was able to I had a lot of fun doing what I did. I'm not going to deny it. I even used to say I loved my job. But there
Right.
came a point in time that I said, no, but I want to do these other things. I want to travel. I want to see the world. I got to see the world a lot with my job, but I was working, so it was kind of going to a bunch of meetings and then running to whatever site it was to go visit. And, I got a lot of my stuff paid for, a lot of my travel paid for by the government. But at the same time, it's not the same thing as when my wife and I go and travel. And I noticed you were saying that you have a little one that was just born 2 years ago. And one of the things that I think is very commendable too is opening your little one up to different culture, a different way of life, a different system of education, all of that stuff. I mean, and you being a teacher probably can attest to the system is a little bit different here, even in private schools and that type of thing. Um,
Right.
so basically, the other thing that I'm going to ask you here, and I think Roddy, you said you lived in McAllen, so you were a little bit familiar with Mexico. But
Right.
one thing that I found out is that the north part of Mexico is not the same as the central part of Mexico, and because my wife's from Monterrey, so I'm very familiar with the northern part of Mexico. Now I worked with the Mexican government a lot, so I got to visit a lot of it. But the culturally wise, another thing is that you guys, Roddy, you moved to China, and then you got married, and your wife moved back from China to Mexico or Houston, and then from Houston to Mexico. Now, I can imagine that because you guys have done all of those changes, that this has not affected you that much. But did it affect you a little bit? Was it different? For example, from a perspective, actually, Landy, you moved to Houston, so I'm almost sure that was a cultural change. And then you're moving to Mexico. There's another cultural change. And then Roddy moved to China at one point, and I'm almost sure that was a cultural change. So let me ask you, are you just kind of used to the cultural change that it didn't affect you? Or does it still affect you a little bit? Because I think that's one of the things that I think a lot of people have a hard time with. And you guys are very flexible, but a lot of times, and I tell this to a lot of expats, is that a lot of people come here for the cost of living because it's cheaper, and you even mentioned it that we have this image of beach living every day and being on the beach and having my margarita and everything else, but then you have to realize that there's certain things that come along with it.
Right.
Things don't work like they do in your country, your home country, whether it be the United States, whether it be Canada, whether it be the UK. Did you have issues with cultural change? And if you did, were they for the better? Was it a little bit of adjustment, or is it something that you still are adjusting to?
Yeah, I think, as you kind of pointed out too, as far as moving here to Mexico, we both had traveled even before we met each other. As a teacher, I was afforded summers off, so I was able to do a little bit of traveling. Then, of course, me moving to China. I mean, like you mentioned, that was a huge culture shock. But that's actually one of the reasons why I chose to go to China. When I was deciding to go teach abroad, I could have gone to a Latin American country or a European country where I was kind of comfortable with the cultures and maybe the language a little bit. And I said, yeah, I want to go somewhere completely, you know, foreign to me. And so, I ended up settling on China and Shanghai. So again, that was a huge culture shock, and learning to adjust to China, in my experience, was much, much, much different and harder than moving here to Querétaro. So again, that definitely helped me as far as adjusting to the culture shock. Traveling, living abroad before, So coming to Mexico wasn't that big of an issue. Now, of course, Landy, it's a different story.
Yeah, for me, in my 20s, I have traveled around the world, Europe, Australia, about 20 countries. But again, that travel is travel. It's not a deep living there to totally feel the culture that much. And I also feel living in China, I don't like my government. Lots of things I just hate it. Because I've been traveled around the world, so I've been on the internet, which once I'm out, I don't have a firewall. In China, everything blocked. People don't see what's really going on in the world. So I see it, so I judge it, I don't like it. And I met Roddy, and I said, oh, here's the chance. I have my opportunity to develop myself in another culture, another country. Why not? And the US is a big country. Everybody want to go there to chase the American dream. So okay, let's do it. And I was in my 30s, so we just moved together. And the US is definitely a place you could make some money. Everybody could make a business, everything, all the laws, everything, support small business. In China, it's another story. So I see the opportunity, we work hard on it, and now we have a kid. So it's like a life shift. So we changed to a little bit slower life pace in Mexico, a little bit easier. But still, it's also good for us to explore different cultures and also save more money and focus on doing some other business. So when we go back to US, and I think everything will go even smoother.
Yeah, I think moving here, like I said, moving to any new country, there's going to be an adjustment. There's little things you got to learn about the culture and the area that you're in.
Yeah, especially for me, I don't speak Spanish, so I'm still learning. So every
And
time I
and
go to
that
restaurant, it's
and
very
that was another
survival.
and that was another question that I was going to ask you, Landy, if you've had, do you get frustrated? Because one of the things that we talk about learning the language and everything else, I get two reactions. One is, especially from the older people, is I get, well, and I'm too old to learn a new language. And my response is always, well, when you get older, your mind starts going, and I start forgetting. I'm 57 now, or 56, and actually, you don't think as sharply as you do when you're 30 years old, and I always say, well, but the way to keep your mind active is to exercise your mind, and learning a new language is probably the best exercise for your mind that you can actually do. And then the other thing that I also say is that, you know what, it's not so bad. I think one of the things that I've had an issue, I moved to Brazil for a little while, and I had to learn Portuguese, and my agency thought, well, South America, it's all Spanish, and Portuguese sounds like Spanish, so you'll be okay. And I learned Portuguese very quickly, but one of the things that I had to get over, the hurdle I had to get over, was whenever I would speak, and especially at my level, because I was a diplomat at the time, and we'd have these meetings, and a lot of times in Brazil, most people are educated in both either English or Spanish. If you've gone through higher education, it's required in Brazil to learn a second language. So most of them would say, do you want us to conduct the meeting in English, or do you want us to conduct the meeting in Spanish, because we know you know Spanish? And usually I would always respond, no, we're going to conduct it in Portuguese, and just excuse me because probably I'm going to speak really bad. But I found that it got me diplomatically probably further, speaking my broken Portuguese, struggling, laughing at the table with these individuals. And a lot of these individuals were high-level individuals, the equivalent of the director of the FBI. I'm sitting there speaking. It would be like me going into the FBI, speaking with the director of the FBI and saying, speaking like I was a little kid or 5 years old. So, but we had a lot of fun. And, I found, especially in Latin America, that people are very forgiving. And another thing I think you can speak for, Roddy, is we learn a different type of Spanish down in South Texas.
Oh, yeah.
And so sometimes when you say things here in Mexico, or my Spanish it still is to this day very broken, because I wasn't raised speaking Spanish. I mean, I was raised in an ambient where they were speaking Spanish all the time, my parents and everything else. But my Spanish to me, when people say, "Oh, you sound fine," but to me, it's broken Spanish. Especially being married to a Mexican, my wife makes fun of me all the time. We have fun with it, but you can even attest to the fact that maybe you have a little bit of problems with your Spanish, or sometimes people. But have you noticed that the people here in Mexico are very accommodating? I found this in Latin America. Yeah. And I found it even down in central Mexico, because we speak different. In the north, actually, it's funny because my wife's from Monterrey, and we moved to central Mexico. So when she would even speak Spanish, fluent Spanish, people would look at her like, "Why are you so mad all the time?" Or, "Why are you yelling at me?" And, and we couldn't, but it's just the way people from the north speak. It's with this tone. It's a different tone. So do you find that people are very understanding in Mexico, especially with you, Landy, that has a problem or is trying? Do you find that people are even like accommodating, even if they understand English and you're trying to speak Spanish, they're real good at trying to work with you, kind of thing, and communicate?
I think so. My Spanish is still very, very basic. I only can order some food from restaurants. So I talk very slowly, and they understand me. They try to understand.
Yeah.
Especially in Querétaro, there are not so many people speak English. Not like Ahihi. The time when we travel there, literally, we found everybody can speak English.
Everybody speaks English. Yeah, Ajijic a very Americanized area. So now, so you guys have been really. Go ahead, Rod. I think you were.
I was going to speak to this. My experience here. I think I'm kind of like in your boat. Growing up in McAllen, I grew up, predominantly speaking English. The same as you. I now know. Grew up in a household where my parents were both native Spanish speakers. Born in Texas, but grew up speaking Spanish. But when I grew up, they spoke to me in English, and I just learned English. So my Spanish was very limited. Of course, it's gotten better, throughout my years and living in the valley. As you know, I mean, there's a high majority of people who speak nothing but Spanish. So that definitely helped. I would put my level somewhere at a maybe intermediate, high intermediate level. I definitely can still get some things wrong. But as Landy and you can attest to, people here are very understanding. And especially if they understand that you're coming from another country. They definitely appreciate the effort in speaking their language, right? And they're definitely a lot more accommodating and friendly to you when you speak Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Now I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up because I think we've covered pretty much your move to Mexico, that type of thing. Is there anything else that you'd kind of like to add about your move to Mexico? We're going to actually go in. We're not totally finished yet, because if you noticed at the bottom of the screen, I put Life with Louie, and they actually started a YouTube channel. That's how I actually found Roddy and Landy, is because of their YouTube channel. But before we go into your YouTube channel, is there anything else that you'd like to add about moving to Mexico?
About moving to Mexico, kind of ties in with our YouTube channel, which is actually one of the episodes we're working on. Is just learn about where you're moving to, whether it's Mexico or any country. Look into some of the details of what it's going to be like to live there, and especially the day and age that we live in now. It's very easy. Right? You can go onto YouTube, internet, and check out so many things about what it's like to live in that area. So there's definitely things you can learn out there, things you may have an idea about, some things you may have no idea about. So definitely very important, to get on forums, get online, see what's out there, and learn from people who have lived the life you want to live, right? And definitely take some of those lessons with you.
Yeah.
Awesome. And you guys actually started a YouTube channel, and that's what I want to get into before we leave. And tell us a little bit about your inspiration to actually start a YouTube channel like I did. I started my YouTube channel. The reason why I did actually is because I worked a lot in Latin America, and I also worked with the federal officials here, immigration, customs. And one of the things that I did notice from stuff that I already knew from working within the framework of the Mexican government, is that there's a lot of misinformation out there. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to set the record straight and on a lot of things that I know, but at the same time, I don't know everything, because I've always said that to everybody, is I'm not an expert at any of this stuff. But and also I got to this point where I kind of got interested in video creating, just kind of like, okay, I want to see, let me buy a camera. And we started with an iPhone. And then, the next thing I know, I want to buy the new MacBook to see how that's going to go. And the video editing software and how cool this is. I'm kind of a nerd, a tech nerd in a sense. So it kind of gave me an excuse to go buy a bunch of new toys and start playing with them. What was your inspiration to start a YouTube channel? And I think, one of the things is I think this is great of what you're doing, and because you're sharing your experience, because my experience is not the same as your experience. And everybody's experiences are the same. And actually, I had a couple that I actually interviewed previous to this. They have a YouTube channel called Gringos R Us, and actually I met them on a live. Well, my one failed attempt at streaming live, which I'm going to be streaming live soon again. But they were online and they were asking me, well, we were thinking about starting a YouTube channel, and they haven't moved yet. They're actually moving in August, I think. They're moving to Querétaro, as a matter of fact. They chose Querétaro also, and I'm going to do a follow-up interview with them whenever I can get the chance. But they actually said, we'd like to document from the time we get our residency, how we got our residency, how we sold our house. And I said, you know what? Nobody's ever done that before. Why don't, that's an awesome idea. And so, I saw you guys, and especially your experience, and, we discussed this already. Roddy, you moved to China and then moved back to Houston and then moved down here. And Landy, you moved to Houston and then moved down here. So what inspired you to do a YouTube channel? And tell us a little bit about your YouTube channel, and I'll be leaving a link in the description of the video below. And I really encourage you guys to check them out. I've watched their videos, and I think you have some very interesting things and stuff to contribute to the community.
Right. So I guess what inspired us was, again, how can I put this? There are a lot of channels out there with travel and life from Mexico, but like, as you mentioned, every experience is unique. So again, we kind of approached it from how we got here. We are still a young YouTube channel, so we're still trying to find our exact route. But we definitely want to have or be able to help people who may be thinking about coming to Mexico or maybe living here already. And again, some things that they may need to think about, or things that can help them. But also, we want to try to inspire people to, possibly retire early. We want to speak a little bit more on real estate and how people can do it, as they possibly think about retiring early, or different ways to think about money. Because when it came to our story, as Landy mentioned, one of the books that kind of got us started was the Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad. And I think a lot of people have that mentality of, I'm stuck in my job, I don't have time, I can't do this, but we're living proof that you can. I was a full-time teacher and a coach. Landy, when she first came here and in China, was a physical trainer. So we both had jobs. We were working, and then of course moving back to Houston, having to adjust to the culture for her. These are all things that could stop a lot of people. So we just want to kind of let people know that there are ways to be successful, no matter how young or old you are. One of the stories you always hear about, was like, Colonel Sanders, KFC, and he didn't become a millionaire to his 60s. So it's never too late to decide, like you said, take your own fate by the hand and you lead it, and let people know that is possible. And again, and then just let people know what life is like here in Mexico. I don't know anything else.
Yeah, as Roddy said, we know many people are struggling in their rat race, just daily work, 8 hours, and struggling to pay the rent, pay the bill, pay the mortgage, and how our story could influence a little bit on them. Anything we could help many other families like us to get out of it. Even you don't have to move to Mexico, but how to achieve the dream of financial freedom. but
And
not by saving 25 years of income. That's very impossible for most people.
well,
But
you bring up a good point. I have a government pension. I worked for the government for 30 years, so I have an actual pension and that type of thing. But part of my retirement package was 401ks and that type of thing. And when you save for 30 years, sometimes you don't have the money you thought you were going to have in your 401k. And I can attest to it. And you guys are living proof that you can do something different. You can be successful, and you can live a life of financial freedom, just like my friend Miles Wakeham says on his Unconstrained podcast. If you have the will to do it, and you have that desire to do it, and you guys did it, I mean, you guys are a perfect example of how it's possible. And look at you now. And I really do commend you guys for actually making this YouTube channel and saying, hey, look, if you can do it, we can. If we can do it, you can too. As a matter of fact, it's funny because the Gringos R Us, that's their thing, because they're from North Carolina. They don't even know Spanish, nothing like that. And they just decided to go to Mexico. They picked Querétaro. They did their research. One of the things that I admire about them is they do their research very thoroughly. And one of the things that two expats, Gringos R Us, two expats with a plan, and their motto is, if we can do it, you can too. And I think you guys have the same attitude. And I really commend you guys for it. And I really thank you for coming on this, on my Living in Mexico No Bull series, and, spreading the word that it is possible to retire early. It is possible to enjoy your life. And even if you're not retiring, like you said, at 30 years old or 40 years old or 50 years old, like I did, there's still time to do it.
Oh, yeah.
And there's still time to do it. There's different ways to do it. You guys did it in real estate, and like I said, my friend Miles has all sorts of other different ways that how to build organic income and that type of thing. And I'm amazed because I subscribe to his podcast and everything else, and when he talks about different things, and that's why it's called Be Unconstrained. How to live a life of unconstrained freedom. And I think you guys really did grasp the true meaning of the word freedom, and you've taken it by the hand, and you've done it, and congratulations. And thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. Make sure you check out Life with Louie. And I don't know where you're at with subscribers, but we need to get that subscription count up. And
Sure.
and I am the first one to say, go check out Life with Louie. And thank you very much, Landy and Roddy, for coming on the show and giving me the opportunity to watch you guys grow from the ground up.
No, absolutely. Thank you.
thank you for having us here.
Thank you. And stay tuned for more episodes of Living in Mexico No Bull.